Hi there. I want to start off with this question. Has it ever occurred to you that the wildlings that live north of the wall are literally the only group of humans in the story that consider first cousin marriage to be incest? Every other group, the Starks themselves, they have first cousin marriage. Ned Stark's parents were first cousins. And that will be the key point of this video when I get to the conclusion. But this video is about the White Walkers and their effect on the Wildlings. And it's a continuation of my series reacting to this great set of analysis videos that Preston Jacobs did 5 years ago. Because I was looking up the question of what could the White Walkers be doing in House of the Dragon Season 2 now that spy photos have revealed they're in it. Because it's a follow-up podcast, audio only, just as a bonus here. That my main podcast that I just did was focused on part 3 of his series, where the first 2 parts are introductions on Craster, but then this was going over what were the White Walkers doing since the Long Night. Point 4 of his video series was going over why is Craster having all of this compound incest, fathering children on his own daughters, and do the White Walkers actually want that to secure certain bloodlines? And I'm just rounding that out even more. Now, like I said, just quick summary of the first part. The theory is that the Night's Watch didn't quite defeat the White Walkers so much as there was a truce, where since the beginning they've been secretly giving the White Walkers baby sacrifices like Craster was doing, but on a much larger scale. That there's this secret tunnel through the Night Fort that could only be for secret baby sacrifices, and that they got them from the practice of First Night of lords raping the commoner women to get a surplus of unwanted babies. But that the reason the White Walkers are coming back after 8,000 years is the early Targaryen kings shut that down. That Jaehaerys and Alysanne, Jaehaerys the old king at the beginning of House of the Dragon, in his youth, about 60 years after conquest, he shut down the Night Fort and banned First Night. This would cut off the pipeline of baby sacrifices to the White Walkers, and that might be why they're returning. And there's other details to go over in the last video of why it takes so long. Maybe they go through dormancy periods. But this is about the effect on the wildlings themselves, and just why are there wildlings at all? For starters, and just diving in my script here now, if they set up human sacrifices since the beginning, why would either side ever agree to that if they were winning? If either side was winning, they wouldn't, so it had to be a stalemate of some kind. That if the humans were winning, why would you ever accept human sacrifice? But then again, we know, well, they never totally defeated the White Walkers. They drove them back to the polar regions. The fact that they built a wall is they couldn't destroy them. They had to contain them. Fair enough. And it's possible they never could wipe them out, that they can flee to the polar regions. We could never find them. Why didn't they wipe them out? Apparently they couldn't, so fair enough. The bigger problem is, why would the White Walkers ever agree to that, is everything we know about them. That, okay, the Night's Watch didn't have much of a choice, it's the best they could do. Particularly the revelation we got from the TV show, Preston didn't really address this, that they're not really a race so much as living weapons. They're constructs, weapons created by the Children of the Forest, created in desperation when they were losing the invasions by the first men to Westeros. So as constructs, their sole reason for existence is kill all humans. It's a directive they have. They're like Terminators. Why exactly did they eventually turn on the Children of the Forest? Maybe revenge for creating them in this life of torment, I'm not sure, but the books might never give more of a reason than we were messing with magic we couldn't understand, and the White Walkers just shifted from killing humans to killing everyone. We don't know. But why would essentially out-of-control Terminator robots programmed to kill all humans accept a truce of any kind whatsoever? Except give us baby sacrifices once a century and we won't attack in force. They wouldn't have accepted if they were winning. Nor would the humans, but maybe they were losing, and, I mean, they're not mindless automatons, though. We saw they were willing to spare Craster if he gave them sacrifices. That's established. Maybe it wasn't that different from how the war between the First Men and the Children of the Forest ended. It ended in a negotiated truce because the price of victory was too high. The children couldn't win, but the First Men went, well, we lose so many people, it's not worth it, so we're willing to settle for half of Westeros. We'll accept all the open plains and stuff, the coasts, but the deep forests, we agree not to go in there. Those are your lands. So maybe this was some other form of stalemated truce or something. I'm not sure on the specifics. Maybe something like that happened. But on a thematic level, I can see how the Night's Watch was, look, even something as simple as stay dormant up there, we'll give you a few babies, don't attack and force again. However this was established, and that's not really what this video is about. However it was established, the general principle of we'll give you some babies from the Seven Kingdoms if you stay away. The core question this raises is the condition of the humans still living north of the Wall, the Wildlings, or free folk, which is the whole point of this video. I didn't see anyone ask this, even Preston. Maybe he did in another video, but not in the one I saw. After the War for the Dawn, and the end of the Long Night, and the original construction of the Wall, why the heck would the First Men allow any humans to continue living beyond the Wall? We never really asked. I'm just thinking, why were they... It's just said they're the people who were just unlucky enough to be trapped living north of the Wall when it was built. What does that even mean? Just how was anyone still alive that close to the White Walkers' core territories to begin with? And beyond that, even if, okay, somehow they managed to survive in the wild, not as settled, but as nomads and living in the forest, they managed to dodge them, why would the ancient First Men kings like Bran the Builder ever allow that? Why wouldn't Bran the Builder try to evacuate them south of the Wall? Not for altruism, but because they're potential meat for the White Walkers to grow their army with. I mean, if nothing else, they knew that they can be turned into zombies, and later on they could be a source of babies for making new full White Walkers. Now, it's easy to understand thousands of years later, by the time of the Targaryen dynasty, like past 1,000 years when no one believes in White Walkers anymore, maybe the independent Stark kings, or even under the Targaryens in the last 300 years, they see the Wildlings as just barbarian invaders, don't believe in the White Walkers, and, okay, they would try to keep them pent up beyond the Wall rather than share their lands with them. What's wrong with keeping them there? That makes sense. I'm talking about the immediate post-Long Night generation, or even the century after that, where they were really sure the White Walkers were real and could reanimate the dead. Why would you leave them a breeding population of humans to cull up there to slowly build their armies with? That the first time there was a king beyond the Wall, why wouldn't you try to evacuate them to the south? When they knew what was happening. Consider the story of the Night's King. The 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. The TV show made a similar name for the other guy they made up. But the 13th Lord Commander of the Watch, who was seduced by a sorceress who may have been sent by the White Walkers or something if she wasn't one herself, and came to offer human sacrifices to the White Walkers. To the point that they said the current Stark king and the first king beyond the Wall, Joramun, had to make common cause to defeat him. Why didn't the Starks let Joramun and his wildlings south of the Wall if they knew not to be nice to them, but they could be used to raise another army of zombies? That's a big point in Book 5, which the TV series, of course, totally turned to shit, that the Night's Watch officers don't mutiny against Jon Snow. I'm annoyed more people aren't angry about that, because they're just, oh, Jon Snow is dead. It's, why would they mutiny and kill him for letting wildlings through the Wall after they already let them through the Wall? That's gibberish. That's just as gibberish as Season 8. Or that, like, they left Hardhome by ship and then just mysteriously appeared Castle Black in the middle of the continent for this big tense face scene of, oh, look, the faces brooding at each other as they decide to let them through the gate. No. That if he was going to mutiny against them, it would have been over bringing them back in. He would have left them out there. It makes no sense. In the books, they grudgingly let the wildlings through the Wall. Granted, they are worried about we're using up a lot of our food resources on them, but The gift is empty. They said we can have them farm the gift or something. That in the books, the mutiny happens because Jon says, I will break my vow of neutrality to fight the Boltons. I can't let them tear apart the North like this with an enemy at our backs while we're fighting the White Walkers. So they mutiny against him. And they didn't want that moral ambiguity, I guess. It's just stupidity. But in the book, they do grudgingly bring up in the 5th novel, look, every wildling we leave north of the Wall from the remnants of Mance Rayder's army is one more zombie they're going to throw at us. And in many ways that was brought up since Jon met Mance and the other wildlings in the earlier books, that if the wildlings don't get south of the Wall, they're just more dead bodies to turn into zombies. Might as well let them south, and this really comes to a head in the 5th novel of why he lets them through. That we know what's waiting for us up there, that the survivors of the... It's not just Jon's word that the White Walkers are back. The other survivors of the battle at the Fist of the First End, they are back. That we've seen zombies at the Wall. That Alistair Thorne has seen the Oathor zombie that we saw in Season 1. That what are we going to do? Leave them there to turn into zombies? In contrast, Jormun's people were turned away by a Night's Watch that fully knew the White Walkers are still out there. So, why didn't they? And the only logical conclusion I can think of for why the early Night's Watch left the Wildlings up there in the first place, and why they never let them peacefully come through the Wall whenever they were united by a king beyond the Wall like Jormun trying to come south. Why didn't they evacuate them to at least deny their enemy resources? The only logical conclusion I can come to is that the original Wildlings didn't just, we just happened to be living near the core of the White Walkers' territories and survive a generation of eternal winter up there. They didn't just happen to be there, they must have been purposefully trapped there. The Wildlings are essentially a large-scale, free-range farm of sorts to provide the White Walkers with new warm bodies. As a new source of babies and also zombies, somewhat like what the Night's Watch was giving the White Walkers baby sacrifices at the Night Fort. Just as how First Night south of the Wall was a system set up to give them babies, the Wildlings were a free-range version of that. It might have even been part of their original peace agreement. Exile some human tribes north here so we have something to cull. This isn't too big of a revelation to me either. It's just a reasonable extrapolation. They were making baby sacrifices. We saw that they were willing to tolerate Craster giving sacrifices. All of the Wildlings are a sacrifice in a sense. They're a bigger version of Craster's baby farm, just minus the incest. And here we come to the real point of this video. Beyond that. Now, Preston Jacobs made a multi-part video series on the White Walkers and Craster's Keep, and my preceding video was mostly a reaction to Part 3. This is about Part 4, about how the White Walkers seem to be specifically interested in certain bloodlines. To summarize Preston's points, he speculated that the compound incest, multi-generational compound incest, the most extreme, not even like brother to sister, but parent to child incest, over multiple generations. Craster's like having sex with his granddaughters, I think, or at least his daughters who were products of incest like Gilly. He speculated that the extreme compound incest at Craster's Keep isn't just because Craster is some creep, but specifically motivated by the White Walkers trying to keep the bloodline pure for certain magic-based genes. The Craster is doing this on purpose because they want inbred babies. Possibly for some purpose we don't know about yet, but it could be something as simple as babies with a concentrated bloodline for certain magic genes might just be better stock for producing new White Walkers with. Something as simple as that. It might not even be for some end-of-the-world sacrifice or anything, but they make better White Walkers. And if you think about it, that means that First Men magic, like that we know it runs in bloodlines, like skin-changing in Greensight are strong in the Stark bloodline. That would mean that kind of First Men magic, which is tied to bloodlines, is comparable to what the Valyrians did, like the Targaryens. Marrying brother to sister to keep the bloodline pure. Specifically because they were convinced that the more pure ancient Valyrian blood you have, the better you're able to magically bond with and ride a dragon. George R.R. Martin himself, in various video clips I've seen in the past year or so for House of the Dragon and stuff, briefly has said, well, he's tight-lipped about his magic system, but he'll remark, it's not just technology by another name, it's mysterious, and even the groups that wield magic like Melisandre really don't fully understand it. They're messing with powers beyond human comprehension. But, and he has clearly said this, one principle they have figured out as reliable is that there is power in certain bloodlines. That there is certain bloodlines are strong with magic. It flows in bloodlines. You know, like how the Force is strong with the Skywalker family. But the Force is inherently mysterious. Both the Jedi and Sith can never 100% understand it. The point is, Martin has said bloodlines are important and certain magical powers are tied to your bloodline. The Starks are powerful. Wargs are, the real name is skin changers, are people who can take over the minds of animals. Wargs are a subset of skin changers who can take over specifically wolves. Wolves are very common. They say other types of animals are harder to master. But you see people like warging into birds and into boars. It's not that they're not wargs, it's they're a bit more than wargs, the Stark children. I mean, there's a point where Arya skin changes into a cat in Braavos in the book, so she's a war, but you can skin change into a lot of things. Terminology, if you haven't heard it, it's really called skin changing, and the sight is called green sight in the books. And they say, like, there's a point where the three-eyed raven says 1 man in 1,000 is born a skin changer, and 1 in 1,000 skin changers is born with green sight. Green sight is incredibly rare, what Bran has that the other Stark kids don't, though they occasionally have important dreams and stuff. But it's tied to bloodlines. Bloodlines are important. So the White Walkers wanted to produce certain concentrated, pure bloodlines, going above and beyond what the Valyrian brother-to-sister marriage did to outright have Craster fathering children on his own daughters and granddaughters. Very extreme inbreeding, like with dogs and horses, can produce very rare recessive traits, like whatever the magic gene is. And thinking on all this is pretty straightforward. That magic appears to be a recessive trait, like Varamir Sixskins, very prominently in the prologue to Book 5. He's a very powerful skin changer, and he notes in his narration that he fathered like a dozen children on various women, but none of his children were ever skin changers like he was. Probably because the women he had children with didn't have a strong bloodline themselves. In genetics, that's called a wild population, that you assume that when you're dealing with a genetic recessive trait like sickle cell or hemophilia or something, or Tay-Sachs, that you're dealing with, when you're on a family tree, an outsider presumably doesn't have the rare gene. When you do see this type of thing expressed, it's when the other person you're marrying outside the family might actually be a distant cousin, or in a small population bottleneck, you end up with people who also have the recessive gene. You don't assume they're what's called a wild gene, that don't assume they're not carriers. Okay, Preston's video shows this with a lot more charts and what's called Punnett squares for genetics with recessive traits, but straightforward, that magic is recessive but tied to certain bloodlines, and they want to concentrate the bloodlines with extreme incest at Craster's baby factory. That makes sense to me, we've seen what they're doing, of why they'd be trying to do that. And this comes to my key conclusion of this video, which isn't something Preston explicitly considered back in his video 6 years ago. He went over a lot of genetic stuff, like hemophilia is actually an X-linked trait, how that would play different. Let's assume it's just a generic recessive trait, it's not sex-linked. But it hit me like a ton of bricks after watching Preston's video and thinking on genetic traits and populations and how they function from a world-building perspective, from a societal perspective. Preston didn't mention this, but after watching his video, it just hit me. The Wildlings are literally the only group in all of Westeros that considers cousin marriage to be incest. First cousin marriage. Here's a quote from Book 3, A Storm of Swords. Ygritte explains this. He thinks he thought she was interested in another guy from her warband, and she goes, no, he's from my village. You know nothing, Jon Snow. A true man steals a woman from afar to strengthen the clan. Women who bed brothers or fathers or clankin offend the gods and are cursed with weak and sickly children, even monsters. And think of the hint at that of what if the incest is being used to produce children who can be turned into White Walkers who are monsters. That little hint of what makes them sickly, or even monsters. That, yes, it is being used to make monsters, but the way she phrased that is women who bed brothers or fathers or clankin. That is a very broad term that not even like, oh, your cousins. Maybe she means cousins, but even broader clankin. Every other social group regularly practices first cousin marriage. Even other groups descended from the first men south of the Wall, such as the Starks themselves. Ned Stark's father, Rickard Stark, married his own first cousin once removed, Lyanna Stark. But her surname was Stark even before they were married. And because Lyanna Stark had the... Well, Jon Snow isn't really Ned's son. He is the son of Lyanna. He has the same grandparents as Robb and Arya did. That either way, Ned and Lyanna's parents were first cousins once removed, so just like the other Stark kids, Jon's maternal grandparents on his Stark side were first cousins. And this goes for Bran and Arya, and they're strong with the magic genes. And it's amazing because I've been like analyzing this from a historian's perspective. I talk a lot about world building and societal patterns. You see my videos on like gender stuff and women's social patterns and feudalism. And I've even had videos talking about, well, these are their attitudes towards gender and sexuality. And I've mentioned, oh yeah, this is incest definitions vary between groups. It never connected with me. You know, it's weird that the Wildlings consider marrying clankin, marrying cousins, is incest in a way that the Starks don't, even though they're both descended from the first men. What kind of threw me was I thought it was because, you know, keep in mind their population is smaller and they live in tiny villages, and it's not like, oh, a Stark could marry someone from the Riverlands or something. Like, they're not as mobile of a society, they're smaller. I thought it was just a practical solution with a tiny polar population, you know, of nomads. I thought it was just a way to deal with inbreeding in an isolated population, is try to take women from distant villages as best you can. To avoid marrying clankin. I thought it was just because they had a small population would run into a bottleneck eventually. I mean, think about like hunter-gatherer groups and stuff in real life, that when you're a small, like even the Germanic barbarians and stuff, everyone is a 6th degree cousin at some point. That's what makes you clankin. Though if you look at it like a genetic chart, like 5th to 6th degree cousins have less than 1% of shared genetic material. Whereas like your first cousin, I looked this up, has 12.5% shared DNA. Like a 6th degree cousin, less than 1%. It thins out pretty much by 6 degrees, but still clankin. That when we talk about clan groups, or the old Germanic or Slavic war bands are moving around, or the Goths or whatever, with a smaller population, it gets harder to avoid cousin marriage. I got that. But I'm reassessing this now in light of all those speculations Preston had about concentrating their bloodlines. And out of universe, is this something Martin was emphasizing to us as a hint by the author? Was it just a stray mention, or did he really emphasize it? Well, he really emphasized it. That not just having Ygritte mention this in dialogue, but the entire process by which Jon chases down Ygritte. This is a central thing in their relationship, that, well, Jon, you chased down Ygritte and captured her. And that's really how we take wives. We go and capture women from distant villages. So in many ways, having chased her, captured her, and had sex with her, she's now your common law wife, is kind of a thing. But think about how much they emphasize that, how much Martin emphasizes that in the book. Tied with Ygritte saying our entire system of marriage is based on capture outside women who are not even remotely clankin. He really stressed that. That being essentially trapped with the White Walkers north of the Wall for thousands of years, think of the social pressures on the Wildlings that they were under to try to avoid being taken by them. Well, for starters, something basic that we can all agree on, the Wildlings traditionally burn their dead. They cremate them. They don't bury them in tombs like the Starks do. The Starks bury their dead. Even the Ironborn have, like, burials at sea, and just other First Men groups have, not just the Starks, they said since ancient times, there's burial mounds of the First Men, that there's the Barrowlands through the south, through the north near House Dustin that you have to go through. They had tombs. The Wildlings don't. They burn their dead. And, okay, recently Mance Rayder's army knows to do that because of the zombies, but maybe I get the impression they always did that for thousands of years. That is a common tradition for the Wildlings to burn their dead. As maybe a social relic from the Long Night. This could have been going on since the Long Night itself, as a widespread practice, and they might not even have remembered why they were doing it until they came back in Mance Rayder's time, but just as in, we don't remember why we do this, but it's a cultural tradition that we always burn our dead. So the White Walkers were denied new bodies. That if the intention was trap the Wildlings up there in these polar tundras and these polar taiga forests, to give the White Walkers a source of dead bodies to be meat for their zombie army, they denied them that by burning their dead. Well and good, that pretty much stops that up. But they still want to take babies to make new White Walkers. So they burn their dead. Could these anti-White Walker social practices have extended to other things? That if they're most interested in stealing babies from certain specific magic bloodlines, families that are strong and concentrated with certain bloodlines for skin-changing and greensight, the Wildlings would try to avoid concentrating their bloodlines as much as possible. They consider marrying first cousins, or even more generally clankin, who are like 3rd to 5th degree cousins. They consider all of that to be incest, when even other First Men groups descended from the Starks are willing to marry their first cousins. Perhaps this is some ancient taboo meant to prevent concentrating magic genes enough in one bloodline that the White Walkers will come for your children. And there's also a third point tied with that. Consider that the Wildlings, in terms of bloodlines, consider the Wildlings do not have a hereditary noble class at all. And the big point emphasized, again, this is something out of universe. Think Martin wanted to emphasize this, that you don't become king beyond the wall because your father was. Most clan chieftains aren't even hereditary. The ancient First Men had kings, however. They had Bran the Builder. And they might not have been, I've talked about this in other videos about, like, the Long Night era, they might not have been absolute monarchs, more of a first among equals, but even groups, I said, looking at the groups descending from them, the other ones that they say live closer to the way the First Men did, like the Cranog men in the Neck, still have houses with families, and they say, well, that the Reeds are more, House Reed is more of a first among equals among them, that it's not really an absolute leadership among the Marsh Kings. Or like the Hill Tribes in the Vale, they still have leaders who are hereditary chieftains, and they're not absolute monarchs. They have to rule through consensus. They have clan gatherings. They have council meetings. It seems to be sort of like the real-life Germanic tribes. It's not an absolute monarch king in the sense of 16th century France. It's more like the old Frankish kings of 6th century France from the 600s. You're a clan leader, but you have a council of advisors. You're not an absolute monarch. But point is, they still had hereditary leaders and hereditary rule. And look at the Thens, for example. The Thens, who they say, unlike the other Wildlings, because they're in an isolated valley, they live a little closer to how the original First Men did. They have a hereditary chieftain, the Magnar of Then. So all sources indicate that the original First Men had hereditary aristocracy, maybe not absolute monarchs, but they did have bloodline hereditary aristocracy, and the Wildlings officially don't. Something changed when they were beyond the wall like that. They stopped having hereditary leaders. And it seems that it's probable that thousands of years living beyond the wall, it became a strong cultural tradition for the Wildlings to abandon linking leadership to bloodlines altogether, with minor exceptions like the Then. There's always outliers, but they were under societal pressures to burn our dead to deny them zombies, and don't concentrate our bloodlines by don't even marry distant clan kin. Marry women who are from a different region of the land altogether. You don't even marry your third cousin, even though it's not considered incest to marry your first cousin south of the wall. Don't even marry clan kin. She spells that out. Take women from far away, and don't follow someone because he's the son of the last leader. That'll concentrate our bloodlines into a hereditary class. Think how much like the hereditary class, the aristocratic class in the rest of Westeros, rarely takes in new bloodlines. That they're concentrated. You're always at least marrying one of the other noble class. Rarely do they get something. And there's like 100 noble families, and sometimes landed knights get promoted, but that population bottleneck of they're distinct from everyone else. That I think when Melisandre said there's power in king's blood, it might be because the original kings of the first men, the ones they took as lords and leaders, were, just think when back in the tribal era, the Dawn Age, it kind of mentions that they took skin changers and green seers as priests and chieftains. That the original local lords, the little petty kingdoms and stuff, every ruling family is descended from people, or most of them, from someone who used to be strong with magical bloodlines. That in the primitive Dawn Age, where everything was savagery, fighting the children of the forest, they tended to rise to positions of leadership. And might have gone dormant, might have gone recessive, but that it would make sense that the aristocratic bloodlines of Westeros, who are descended from, even the ones that intermarried with the Andals in the south, they go, even like the Lannisters and Tyrells, have some first men blood in them through intermarriage, because the invaders married into the new families. Or, case in point, the Baratheons do descend from the first men, because Boros Baratheon married the daughter of the last Storm King. That you marry the daughter of a defeated king to claim his lands. I think there's power in king's blood because everyone, in ancient times, the magic families tended to be the ruling ones, to rise to positions of power. So I made a lot of analysis videos about the society of Westeros from a world-building perspective of general patterns, not just character studies, but patterns of, well, what is their society like, what are their social standards. And really, this should have jumped out at me sooner. I know this might be a silly, pedantic video for a lot of you, but I have been doing stuff on this since, even videos I made in 2017 and panel videos of this is what their gender and sexuality is like. It didn't jump out at me. It should have. Why do the Wildlings think first cousin marriage is incest, even though their cousins, their other branch of the first men, the Starks, are willing to marry their first cousins? No other group in Westeros, I don't think any other group in Essos either, well, he hasn't talked about them as much. We have never heard of another group, tell me if I'm wrong, in the comments, we have never heard of another group that thinks it's incest to marry your first cousin, or clan kin. And they also don't believe in treating certain bloodlines as special for leadership positions. So are the White Walkers more attracted to stealing babies who have a high concentration of First Men magical genes, for skin-changing a green site? If they are, that would explain why Craster's incest factory was set up, to make thoroughbreds, and explain why they have this bias against hereditary leadership or first cousin marriage.